One of the more obscure things is how XMODEM came about in the first place, and that was that since I'd done my own hardware and it was incompatible, I needed a way to get CP/M because all I could do was my own little kludgy operating system. So a guy named Robert Swartz had the original CP/M from a company called Digital Research, and he had a box that looked a lot like the CBBS box in terms of just being a rectangular box with a couple floppy drives in it from a company called Digital Systems. And so I bought a copy of CP/M and using his system beeped it into a modem and through a microphone and onto a cassette tape, and that's how I transferred the whole CP/M distribution disk was onto a cassette tape using 300 baud telecommunications protocol, and it was 128 byte blocks because that's what CP/M was. You know, read a sector, send it to the tape, put a checksum after it so you know that you can check it later. I don't know if I numbered the blocks to make sure I didn't miss one, probably. Can't remember that. But anyway, that wound up being the protocol almost, you know, chop it up into pieces and put a header on it and put a block number on it and put a checksum on it. I had a communications engineer say, you know, Ward, 128 byte blocks, that was just perfect. He said, how did you pick that? And I said, it was the size of a sector in CP/M. He said, oh, you know, because you said if you sent a real long block, you'd get line noise and you'd have to retransfer it. And if you sent real short blocks, you'd have so much overhead with, you know, transmitting your AX and your NAX and things like that. So he said 128 was perfect for 300 baud. So I thought that was amusing. A friend of mine at work had given me an ASCII reference card. And guess what? It's got words on it like ACK, NAC, EOT, SOH, you know, what do all these things mean? So to make a protocol, I said, well, gee, I guess I better send a header so I know what I'm sending and I'll put a block number in it. And I guess that should start with an SOH, which happened to be an 01 in hex. Let's see if it says it here. SOH equals 1, yeah. So, the 6th CP/M users group disk out of New York, Tony Gold ran it all. And it was, I think, the September 77 disk that had modem.sm on it because it was for using a modem, and it was the stupidest name I could have come up with because obviously people talk about modem, they don't know if they're assuming you're talking hardware. And of course the modem program was the most modified program that ever existed in the world because in the early days there weren't any standards. And the PC, for all its slowness and smallness and things that bugged us all initially, was standard in terms of there was a COM1 and it was always at the same place and you could write a COM program and it would work on everybody's PC. So that was a major thing compared to the original modem program or XMODEM later that you had to customize for what serial port. Oh, well, I've got the processor technology 3P plus S, and that's on port. Oh, but you could hardwire, or you could, you know, solder in what ports it was on. So therefore, you'd have to have a different, you know. Somebody even came up with, I think, called MEX or something, Modem Executive, and it was a way of overlaying your modified ports into a standard pre-assembled version of modem or something. So, but so some of the things that happened were definitely adopted. A guy named John Marr worked at IBM and he came up with putting a CRC on it instead of a checksum, and that was a major thing it should have had at the beginning. I had CRC documentation from IBM tape drives on my wall, but I couldn't or didn't understand it well enough to implement it, so it took somebody who could. Actually what happened was late in 77, after I became known because of XMODEM, I was invited to join ARPANET, which was, you know, the internet of the day, but you had to be sponsored. At White Sands Missile Proving Ground sponsored me, so I was able to dial in, and then I was put on various conferencing systems. Everyone seemed to be talking about doing something, and nobody was doing anything, and that was the frustrating part. They were wanting to say, well, now a Commodore PET has to participate and it can only transmit 7 bits or something. And so people were spending so much time, I wound up with a book about that thick of all of the people talking about doing something to allow people to use microcomputers for communication. And we were all doing this on mainframe computers. And that's where I just got so frustrated that when Randy and I got together, the idea of the BBS, just, you know, 2 people was ideal, because doing it in a committee, they had been working on it for months, and in 2 weeks, what was the first thing happened? People on ARPANET were going like, can I get a copy of the code? My God, he's got something working, you know, and it ignored all of the research and all the stuff that they'd been doing, and it was fantastic because it actually worked, and it sent messages back and forth and things like that. So it was interesting that the whole committee concept, and of course, that's what got us going, was just that we weren't trying to do it as a club or anything like that. at some point I was doing the newsletter, and January 16th, 1978, I went out to go to work, and it had been snowing most of the night, and I was unable to get out because it just kept snowing and kept snowing, and I lived on an alley which had to be shoveled. They didn't plow it for a long time. So I think I shoveled for like 2 hours and probably came in at like 9:30, 10 o'clock and realized I was not going to work that day. So, and I looked over and I had a similar box. The Altair and the IMSI had front panel switches, but then there were other companies like Vector and others that just essentially made a card cage because you really only needed to reset and boot into CP/M by then. And I had one because people were wanting to know about microcomputers, and this is before IBM had anything. So I would take mine out, sometimes to customers, other times to various computer shows and things like that to show it off. And so I wanted one that was more portable than my really kludgy big one with all the funny wires. And so I called Randy and I said, you know, I've got the computer club recorder where people can call to find out when the next meeting is and to leave questions and things like that. And why not take that line and put a system on it that people could upload newsletters and things like that, newsletter articles and so on, and we could do a club project. And I remember he said essentially that sounded like a neat idea, but forget the club, because you know what a committee run something will be. It'll take it forever to happen, and just the two of us will do it, and you do the software and I'll do the hardware, and tell me when are you going to have the software ready, like a project manager. So obviously I said I don't know, and he started working on the idea of the hardware and of something that would answer the phone and so on, and I started programming. And was reminded by reading one of these articles that I forgot that in M-Basic, as it was called back then, I started prototyping it, meaning simply coming up with something on the screen like a little help menu or something, and you would type in a command, it would say, what did you do? And it would pretend to be a bulletin board system, which didn't exist, so I was kind of designing it. And so that gave me a feel for the user interface that would be usable. Obviously, with 110 and 300 baud, it had to be pretty net and efficient. So single letter commands were easy to parse, compare to a A, if not compare to a B, if not compare to a C, and so on. So Randy really got cranking on the hardware and had it ready, God knows what, probably within days, if not the same day or something like that. But it took me about 2 weeks, probably about the end of the month, before I had some software ready to test. And I imagine I used the modem program protocol to send the copy off to him, and he would put it up and so on. And we did it pretty much remotely, and a little bit of playing around and let a few friends know it was there and try it and get some early feedback on things that it needed. And basically after the 2 weeks of designing and testing and put it online and refined it a little, and we called it a month, so February 16th became the sort of arbitrary birth date of it. And it happened so quickly because of Randy's brilliant initiative in pulling it back from being a club project, which would take forever and would be something more like the ARPANET that I had been in, which had a lot of people talking about a lot of good ideas, but nobody was just getting down and actually plugging in their soldering irons, so it wasn't happening. And that's how this beast came out of it and ran for many years. I have some fascinating stories. I remember one time it wouldn't run, and Randy thought that there was probably a chip that needed seating. And taking the old S100 boards, let me show you how you seat chips. You get a screwdriver or something, and you kind of get it under the edge of it, and you kind of press it a little to make sure that it's in, and you do the next chip. And Randy said, why would you want to do one at a time when you can do them all at once? And he slammed the whole board up against the wall and fixed it. So had some interesting techniques for keeping things going. And then later on, Randy got into Shynet, starting with an AT&T, the word 3B2 or something like that, or 3B1, or something. I'm certainly not remembering because he was into that more, but it was the real early Unix boxes. Put it online, added a phone line, a couple more phone lines, and so on. And that became much more practical from the standpoint of all the things that it could do. But CBBS still sat down in the basement cranking away, and At one stage, we actually came up with a PC-based emulator for the 8080, and I wrote some routines. I remember seeing one of them on my disk tonight as I was browsing through, called int 8080, and it was essentially a little resident routine in the PC that would handle interrupts coming from CPM asking for the next character from the modem and things like that. So it would interface between the software of the emulator. So I did have to make some minor changes in the code so that it would issue some special instructions that would essentially issue or gave me access to the PC assembler interrupts. And then Randy put it on a network, and so we were actually storing the files on Shynet on his Unix system, but still answering the phone on a PC-based system that was emulating a CPM system. Mostly what happened was when the BBS conventions started, that became a place that you could go and see what other people were doing and find people like Mustang Software and, you know, some of those that had done commercial versions of it. And that was always interesting to me, because what more logical thing could I have done than form a company that commercializes bulletin boards, you know, but just didn't have an interest in doing that or whatever.